Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a teaching with TBA Rabbinic resident Julia Knobloch.
We are not talking about Israeli poetry per se, but we're talking about poetry by Leonard Cohen. And earlier I said, no, American poetry, which obviously, while he did live in LA, he was Canadian. I don't know if he might have had, I don't know. Leonard Cohen, I don't think I need to say so much to introduce about who he was, like singer-songwriter with a long, many decades spanning career. And originally he started out as a poet, he was literally writing poetry back in Montreal at McGill University. And then he was in New York in the 60s, and he always told the story, not to me. I mean, I have actually met him in person, but he didn't tell me that story, but it's an oft-quoted story, how he decided he needed to make a living, and he wasn't of poetry, which I can agree that doesn't really work. So he started to look into having his songs first performed by other singers, actually, not by himself, and then obviously and then the years before he died, when did he die? In 2016, he was on this never-ending world tour, allegedly again because he didn't have any money, because Buddhist monastery hills here around Los Angeles, and apparently the story goes that took all his money, had to go, which was a blessing for me because I got to see him twice, because when he was playing in New York clubs, I was not around. So that was great. I think he's known a lot for his erotic and very romantic, very sensual poetry. He wrote a few political songs as well, and a lot of, I think what is one of the features that is very characteristic of his poetry is that you can read them on all different tiers. There's one song that's called Lover, Lover, Come Back, Lover, 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 and Lover, Come Back to Me. He said that it was written after, when in the 60s, when was the Sinai between Egypt and Israel? 67, right? So he visited, he gave concerts for the Israeli army, and so he had a lot of message in his songs, even though you would not necessarily read them as such, because they are often sort of wrapped into a love relationship that reads like lyrics about a love relationship. And the same is true for one of my favorite things that I'm trying to imitate as well a little bit in my own right, about what is so often done in Jewish tradition and poetry about these two overlapping levels of talking about a love relationship between God and Israel, or God and man, or God and human, and that can also be understood as two lovers, they're two human lovers. So that comes up a lot. One of the prime examples is Shir HaShirim, and he took it. What I find so amazing, and when we will dive into these three songs that I brought, two of which are some very late songs. The third one, the one in the middle, If It Be Your Will, certainly is also a later work, but it's not. It's not as among the very late last songs that he brought out before he died, like these two ones. So he has an intensity and depth to his songs that I find breathtaking, and sometimes he's very direct and very direct, and just doesn't hold back in anything. But his songs are still so much grounded in Jewish thought and imagery and tradition, and he was very, very learned. He was very, very knowledgeable. So he knows what he is doing, and he also searched a lot while he was brought up as as a Jew, of course, and he is very Jewish in a lot of in most of his poetry. But there were times when he was searching and inquiring of other religions, what they could give him. Like I said, he was in the Buddhist monastery. He had his flirt with Christianity, which actually comes up in quite a few songs. And I do believe it is in the third poem that I brought for tonight, and all sorts of other religions. But he was a true Jew in the sense that if we say we're called Israel because we struggle with God, and I think that must be certainly true for his life and also for these three poems. And why did I bring Leonard Cohen today, of all days? Because I try to always have like some sort of nod to the parsha in which we are on. In this case, we are like in between Truma and Tetzaveh, which are the two parashiot about the first time, the beginning of the building of the Mishkan, and then as of tonight, Tetzaveh, many commandments about priesthood, and Cohen is Cohen, so I didn't know if he was actually a Cohen, but I mean, the name is there. So that was one thought, but also because I do think that a lot of the poems that he has written, even the ones that feel a little bit more lighter from the 60s, that he is always searching. You said what? Tortured? Right, and no, that's what I mean, and I do think you're totally spot on what you were saying, because it's there is an existential like torture sense of his trying to connect to God, or trying to make sense of it all, or trying to sort of ask our tradition and the words that we recite so much, especially the love. What is the love? What does it mean, and what does it do us? And he has been, I think, haunted by that his entire life, and especially in these three poems, I think they're good examples of this sort of lost or tortured, confused priest that is out there, and the temple doesn't exist anymore, and he's trying to make sense of it all. And so with that frame, I want to invite one of you to read the first poem out loud, if you like. Okay, thanks. Yes, so they can hear it. So should she come up? Okay. Okay, so Malka is going to read, or you guys can hear.
If I didn't have your love, if the sun would lose its light, and we lived an endless night, and there was nothing left that you could feel, that's how it would be, what my life would seem to me, if I didn't have your love to make it real. If all the stars were unpinned, and a cold and bitter wind swallowed up the world without a trace, well, that's where I would be, what my life would seem to me, if I couldn't lift the veil and see your face, and if no leaves were on the tree, and no water in the sea, and the break of day had nothing to reveal. That's how broken I would be, what my life would seem to me if I didn't have your love to make it real. If the sun would lose its light, and we lived in an endless night, and there was nothing left that you could feel, if the sea were sand alone, and the flowers made of stone, and no one that you hurt could ever heal, well, that's how broken I would be, what my life would seem to me if I didn't have your love.
Thank you, Malka. That was beautiful. Yeah, I mean, since we just read about the outline of the Mishkan, which was going to be the temple, what was going to lead to the temple, and if we think how the presence of the name of God in the temple, how that was sort of like the most intense representation or expression of God's presence or God's love, if one wants to say that, and then that goes away. I think this, what we just heard, sort of expresses pretty much a similar intensity on a poetic level. And well, I mean, I totally agree with you, and I think it's open, or it's deliberately. I think he does it on purpose. I think, yes, everything could be read as someone addressing a lover who has left them, or if they didn't, or actually, if I didn't have your love, like someone who still has the love and is sort of like saying, please don't go away, or like, is very important to them. Exactly. Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think that there is another layer to it, given that Leonard Cohen is known for playing with a lot of this Jewish imagery. And I mean, if I couldn't lift the veil and see your face is one line here that I'm reading as a deliberate reference to Judaism, to see the face of God is like one of the most, the thing that Moses asked for. And also if we look at us, nowadays, seeing the face of a beloved person is always a very intense thing, but also now seeing our faces without masks, like showing one's face is one of the most vulnerable and most intimate and most intense things that we can do. So I do think that it is connected. I am reading it, and I mean I brought it also today for us to think about, to put it in, to read it at the back with the backdrop of Teruma and Tetzaveh. Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm totally with Brent, and I'm reading it as being addressed to a lover, and I'm also reading it as having this deliberate sort of context. Tom, right? Yeah. No. Yes. So we're talking back and forth about this double layer of this poem being addressed to a lover, which it certainly is, and also sort of like looking into what is the backdrop maybe of the necessity, the meaning of the temple, and how much love of God is there to make it real. And then Tom was commenting on that there is some language. If the sea were sand alone and the floor was made of stone, how it really resonates from Ilufino. If our lips were, if our mouths were as full of praise of this, like the sea, and it's true. Whether or not it's intentionally referring to that specific line, but it is language that's familiar to us from the liturgy and from Psalms, and if we can move on to the next one, if because there's more Psalm language, but Larry, right? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there was a comment. I'm sorry, you're Larry, right? What's your name again? I'm sorry, Bob. I mixed it up. No. I'm sorry. So Bob mentioned how basically every line in this poem speaks to like how important all of these things are, and how without that, nothing would be real and everything would be dead, basically. Which again refers to, you can read it as how important a beloved person is to you, for sure. The next, I'm going to read it just out of, it's easier unless someone really wants to come up and read the next one, but then it's easier for those on Zoom. The next one is called If It Be Your Will, and it is related, I think, it is different in the intensity and in sort of the angle from which it's coming, but for me it's coming from the same kind of feeling, believing in that love can actually make things real, even if things are broken. And we'll hear some more psalm related language here. If it be your will that I speak no more, and my voice be still as it was before, I will speak no more. I shall abide until I am spoken for, if it be your will. If it be your will that the voice be true, from this broken hill I will sing to you. From this broken hill all your praises they shall ring, if it be your will to let me sing. From this broken hill all your praises they shall ring, if it be your will to let me sing. If it be your will, if there is a choice, let the rivers fill, let the hills rejoice. Let your mercy spill on all those burning hearts in hell. If it be your will to make us well, and draw us near, and bind us tight, all your children here in their rags of light, in our rags of light, although all dressed to kill, and end this night, if it be your will, if it be your will. So Well, there's some words in there that don't usually come up in prayer so much or in Psalms, but there's a lot of Psalm language. The hills, like the hills is one of the most that jumps right out there, jumping hills, rejoicing, But also it's interesting from this broken hill. So something has happened and has been shattered and destroyed, but there is still this pleading and appeal that it can still be, that it can still continue. And another aspect that is in there is like that is not as pronounced in the first one, even though it is indirectly as well, is this total submission to the entity that's being addressed. Like, I am totally only speaking when it's your will, and now Irv can speak. Yeah. He usually has a dark side. Yeah. So Irv commented that there is a lot of, that what we know from the Psalms, there's distress and we're calling out to God, and we believe in that, and we believe that God can do something and intervene, and we also saying we are here to praise you and to do, and then of course it does take, and Irv called it a Cohen-esque turn, which it certainly is, because it turns it very dark in the last lines when and draw us near and bind us tight. If someone, and as Leonard Cohen did, knew Hebrew and the liturgy and Torah, that of course drawing near is sacrificing, and binding us tight for every Jew is pretty obvious what that might refer to or could refer to. I'm not saying it does, but I read it, and I think Irv did too. And even like dressed to kill, if we have to do that to end the night that is involving us, or surrounding us, then if it be over, there's utter submission there. Yeah. Cantor Chorny. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Cantor Chorny talked about how he combines basically in this poem both the priestly and the prophetic voice. The priest sort of representing what we have to do, and the prophet basically speaking to the priest doing it, and the prophet sort of like calling it out what you have to do, and delivering messages and admonishing and painting terrible situations and scenarios, which then goes back to the point that Brent made before that comment was, isn't that the most trying and most complicated and most intense thing that we have to do, that even in really, really dire moments we have to praise God and ultimately submit to God's will? No, I don't know. It's not a super old song though. It's I want to say it was probably written in the late 90s, maybe. That's a guess. It might be. It's certainly not from his 60s or 70s. That's for sure not. But it could be from the late 80s as well, but I don't think so. The first one that we heard is on the album that came out while he was still alive, the one that's called You Want It Darker. There's actually another one that came out posthumously. And this one and the third one that we're going to look at, unless someone still wanted to comment on this one. Bob? Yeah. I mean, that's total submission there, if it be your will. Bob mentioned how it can remind of the Yom Kippur liturgy, and how we just prostrate ourselves and just fall on the floor. Did you want to say something? Okay. Yeah. I don't know too much, even though we're both in Rav Giller's Intro to Kabbalah class, yet about, Malka made a point that the end of this poem reminded her of Kabbalistic thoughts, and there's a question, what does it mean, rags of light and dressed to kill? You're stripped of, you're just having rags, like you're not dressed fancy, this is all you have, but still there's emanating light, which then again might speak to what of you were saying, and you're dressed to kill, right, yeah, right, yeah, Yeah, definitely, for sure. Also, I was thinking, again, I don't know exactly when this was written, but it is not from the 60s or 70s, but there is a song from the 60s. I'm blanking a little bit on the total line, but I think it's actually from the Story of Isaac, or no, it's a bunch of lonesome heroes, I think. It's on the album that's called Songs from a Room, that's for sure, which is from the 60s. And there's a line, "You who kill these children now, you must not do it anymore." So he has a lot of recurring things where he looks at certain things that he certainly has thought about in his Jewish life. What does it mean? And it's interesting that an older song from when he was younger has that line, and here we're having this an older self, a more mature. He has a few anti-Vietnam War songs, yes, for sure. Yep. We made it to 5:50. We can still listen. We can still shortly look at the third, or we have time, right? Okay, so that's just to wrap it up. The third one that I brought is different from these first two, but I brought them because it, on one hand, I do think that it expresses some of his exploration of other religions than Judaism, and it had, because I wanted to. There is something priestly and solemn about it. You should also, all these should be, if this were not Shabbat, it's wonderful that it is Shabbat, but should Shabbat ever end, if you don't know these songs, you should listen to them, because the music adds to the intensity and to the sacredness of sorts of them. This one is also from the last album that came out while he was still alive. It seemed the better way. Seemed the better way when first I heard him speak. Now it's much too late to turn the other cheek. Sounded like the truth. Seemed the better way. Oh, I'm just going to hold it. Okay. Sounded like the truth, but it's not the truth today. I wonder what it was. I wonder what it meant. First he touched on love, then he touched on death. Sounded like the truth, seemed the better way. Sounded like the truth, but it's not the truth today. I better hold my tongue. I better take my place. Lift this glass of blood, try to say the grace. I'm not reading because it's just repeated, which makes sense musically, but I don't need to read it again. So for me, that does speak to when he was interested in exploring Christianity, and at the end of his life, he writes about how he sort of not continued that because ultimately it didn't convince him. But it's not very much resolved, right? There's a lot that hovers there still. Brent? He made what? Oh, ventured, yeah. Right. Yes. Both comments were about exploring other ways and then coming back to Judaism, even though Judaism sometimes might seem to some people at a time harder to follow. But then the easier way is not the best.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.